The news reached the water gardens on a noon so bright the fountains seemed to be throwing shards of glass. Children shrieked and splashed. The salt wind tanged the air with a clean bite. Sunlight draped the tiles in gold. Areo Hoda stood where he always stood, half in shade, half in sun. The long-hafted axe leaned against his chest like another rib. He saw the messenger long before the boys racing crabs along the channel noticed him. The man came limping, with dust to his knees, and though he had tried to wipe his face clean at the last stream before the Pink Palace, a pale map of dried salt marked where the sweat had gone. From King's Landing, the steward whispered to Areo, "Urgent." They carried the prince out to the terraces, as if for air and for the joy it brought him to watch the children at play. Doran Martell bowed to Pain with the slow courtesy of a man greeting an old acquaintance who would not take his leave. He lay reclined on the litter cushions under an awning, one foot unshod and pillowed in silk, his other leg hidden by folds of orange cloth. Care had hollowed his cheeks. Yet when he lifted his head to take the sealed letter, there was a steadiness that made the men around him straighten their backs. The seal was a lion's head pressed deep and hard. Doran's thumb hovered, touched, and broke it. He read. He did not blink, and the hand that held parchment remained steady until it trembled, very lightly, and then grew still again. He gave the letter to Areo without speaking. The words climbed into Areo like heat climbs a wall. The Prince of Dorne read Oberyn's name twice. He read it a third time as if that would unmake it. The tale was spare as a bone. Trial by combat, accusation flung into the dragon's own throne room, vows and poison and a blow like thunder. The spear had flashed, the mountain had fallen, but he had not died alone. The spear had not been enough to shield a brother from a man who had made killing a career. There were other details, jurists, chancellors, crowed galleries, but the heart of it was a body in the sand, and blood mixed with the dust of the capital. Areo folded the letter. He had seen men die in 100 ways, and all of them were singular and ordinary at once. Oberyn's death pressed upon the terrace like a storm made of heat and silence. Doran closed his eyes. He listened, it seemed, to the fountains. There had always been quiet to the prince. He let seconds pool between words until those around him forgot to breathe. He looked out at the white-slashed water and said, "Bring my daughters to me." They came like a handful of scorpions cast upon a bed of silk. Oberyn Sand arrived first, scarred calf and raw impatience, the length of her spear a declaration. Nymeria behind her, draped in dove gray and a smile that never meant only one thing. Tyene with her open, innocent face, the softness of her hands telling nothing. Sarella was far away in Old Town, where books and lamps had claimed her nights, and the ones younger still were children yet, darting through the water gardens with the rest. But 3 were enough to change a room. "What will you do?" Oberyn said without greeting, without bow. She had a way of addressing the world as if it had been slow to arrive. "Oberyn," murmured Nymeria, laying 2 fingers to her sister's arm, a gesture of caress that could become a noose. "Our Lord Father has just heard that his brother, our uncle, is dead." "We all heard," Oberyn replied. "Every gull on the Cape of Wrath heard. What will you do?" Doran regarded the spear she had brought into his sight as one might regard a guest who had overstayed his welcome. "You will put that thing out of my fountains," he said, so mild that the air crisped with it. Oberyn propped her spear against the pillar with a clatter that made 3 children look up and blink. "I will do what I must," Doran said. "I have waited a long time for a certain wind. I did not expect the wind to smell of my brother's blood." Ilaria Sand was there by then too, not summoned but present, as if grief had called her through the doors with voice enough to drown stone. Her eyes were rimmed with red. The scarf she wore was of a red too deep to count as anything but mourning. She had been heat and laughter once. Now she seemed the shadow of a carved flame. "He died because we are small," Oberyn said. "He died because the lion thinks nothing can sting him." "Not so small," said Nymeria, gliding to the terrace edge. The water's surface threw light up to her chin. "Dorne has stung for 1,000 years, but stings are not enough to pierce plate and chain." Tyene's voice was a pale stream, We have not been blooded in a generation. The marchers sing songs about scouring our hills. The Reach thinks we are sand and stories. The crown remembers us only when it requires a hostage to show the realm it is beloved in all its corners. Aeryo, having long ago trained himself to be a pillar that did not speak, held the prince's eyes and saw the decision form there, blue as deep water. He had been no man of Dorne when he had first come. He was one now, by the oath he had taken to the man before him. The old ways of the far north meant nothing here. He had learned the names of the mountain passes and which lords would cross them with eagerness, and he had learned the color of vengeance when it lay on a desert like the shadow of a hawk. He had thought he would die watching the water. He would not. Doran raised one hand in apology to Ellaria, and then he put his palm to the table as if testing the weight of wood. Send riders to Ironwood, to Skyreach, to Starfall, to the Hellholt, to God's Grace, Salt Shore, Ghost Hill, the Scourge, the Uplands, Kingsgrave, the Tor, and the rest besides. Send to Will. Send to Lemonwood. Send down the Greenblood to Planky Town, and let the orphans know we have need of every pole and every stubborn man who thinks himself a fisherman. Bid House Illyrian meet us at the Prince's Paw. Bid Toland look to her coasts. Bid Blackmont send me her hawks. I would speak with Anders Ironwood first. That gate opens for no man who comes to it alone. Obara's eyes had gone bright as flint. You mean? I mean, Doran said. To raise the sun. I mean to issue the call that men remember in their grandchildren's bones. I mean to close our fists. Ellaria made a small sound, something between a laugh and a sob. He was reckless, she whispered. And you are not. Do not start a fire that will burn the children in this water. Doran's gaze did not move from her. I loved my brother, he said. I love my people. Both truths will weigh equally upon anything I do. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, and when he opened them the softness had become reserve, and reserve was a scabbard that could hide any steel. We will not be the ones to burn children. Obara turned to go. Where do you want me? She demanded, more to speed her feet than because she doubted she would be sent to the front. The prince tapped his finger on the table. The Bone Way, he said. You will ride for Will tonight, and you will listen to Lord Will and to Lady Blackmont when she sends hawks to whisper warnings to you. If you cross into the Stormlands before the passes are ours, I will call you back to Sunspear in chains. Obara bared her teeth in something that was not a smile. I hear you, Nymeria, Doran said. I want the foxes to slip through the shadows before anyone sees the hunt begin. There are ravens to intercept, purses to empty, rumors to mix like wine. Go to the Shadow City and then to Gaston Grey. I will have need of one man from King's Landing who will be slow to leave his chains if left as he is. He is called Balon Swan. Nymeria's lashes swept down and up. You want me to bait a hook with a skull? I want you to make sure the hook is swallowed, Doran replied. We will not be betrayed by courtesy. If the capital sends a knight to us bearing a bag of bones, we will be gracious to the bones and hungry toward the knight. Tyene knelt beside the litter. And I? The faith will have much to say when queens are named. If the faith is friendly, the realm will think twice. If the faith is vexed, wars change shape and grow new heads. Go to the Star. Go to Old Town if you must. Speak softly to septons, to novices, to grandmothers with black beads in their fingers. Remind them of Nymeria's laws and of how Dorne's women have always known what men mean when they speak of order. I will gather prayers, Tyene said, her smile mild and almost sad. And other things. Not that, Doran added, watching her. Not unless you are certain. I would not have you be the spark that makes the Reach think us poison. Tyene inclined her head. I will be as harmless as a dove. Ellaria looked at him for a long time. In the space between the fountains, two boys were paddling with the stubbornness of small animals. I do not want the world that made him what he was to make us like him, she said. Do I have to say anything else? You do not, Doran said. But you must hear one more thing. Arian. They had sent for her, and she had come with a face like dawn stormed by night. The last time she and her father had faced each other in these gardens, she had thought him a spider weaving in shadows, keeping her from the sun. He had put her beneath guard and had taken from her the one thing she had never thought would be taken: her belief that he loved her as she was. He had explained himself later, and her heart had battered itself against the bars he had raised for her future. Now she stood at his feet and held herself so still her hair seemed the only thing alive, a dark current falling down her back. "Arianne," he said again, and the sound was a gentle weight. "I am listening," she said, and kept the tremor from her voice. "What we spoke of, the old law, it is not a toy for girls riding at night for kisses and crowns. It is a scepter heavy enough to bruise the wrist that holds it. I told you once to wait because time would bring something worth taking. The time is here, not because I wish it, but because it has been made for us. I would see Myrcella of House Baratheon and Lannister crowned in sons." He paused. His eyes touched Ellaria, then the 3 sand snakes. "I will have her named in Sunspear, by our law and in our sight. If the rest of the realm calls us rebels for crowning the firstborn while the second sits a throne propped by flowers and debts, then let them. Of the 2, we will be the one standing on a thing that will not bend." Arianne's first breath was sharp, the second slow. She had wanted to hold a crown like a hot coal and force the realm to acknowledge it burned. In the plot she had birthed and watched die, she had tasted triumph like pomegranate juice. Now he handed her the same fruit, bitterer and real. "You are to give me what I asked for," she said. "You mean it." "I mean to give it to Dorne," Doran said. "And you are Dorne's face now." Something shivered, not fragile but final, in the space between them. He was laying down a staff and bequeathing it to the next hand. "This time, no stolen knights. We will crown her with banners rising from every corner of the sand. We will write to every lord and lady of the Dornish marches who has ever sung of stolen daughters and burned keeps. We will say, 'Here stands a realm that remembers its own customs and keeps its word to those who cross its borders.' You will lead that procession, Arianne. You will be the one to raise her hand." "And if the lion reaches for her with claws?" asked Ellaria. Ario shifted his weight. The shadow of the pole supporting the awning had crept to cover his feet. "Then the lion learns that a desert makes terrible ground for hunting," Arianne whispered, and for the first time since she had climbed the terraces her voice held heat. Doran looked at the children. "Send the letters," he said, "and send for Anders Ironwood, BF. Or we march, we will be one house." They rode for Ironwood by night, when the wind coursed down from the hills and the sky above the desert turned to velvet pricked with cold lights. Ario rode behind the prince's litter, keeping the pace of a man to whom the world always came. Guards went before them, silent as knife blades. The moon rode high, jackal cries stitched the rocks. On the river, boats worked by lantern light, polemen singing to the current as if it too had ears that could be charmed. The Blood Royal received them in a hall built like a flayed tree trunk, all wood and shadow. Anders Ironwood's head was thick-coiled with iron gray, his jaw cabled like a bow drawn back. He bent, not quite a bow, to kiss Doran's ring. Old enmities, old fetches of loyalty and insult, hung from the rafters like tapestries. He had taught Quentyn to sit a horse and to think before he spoke. He had filed the boy into something usable. When Doran saw him, there was a strange warmth in the room that had nothing to do with the braziers. "We have something to discuss," Doran said. "You have a brother to bury," said Anders, and that was respect, Dornish and rough. "The rain brought me the smell of it 2 days ago." Doran inclined his head. "We will bury him with water and fire. And then," Anders asked, though he knew, "and then we close the passes behind us and open them before us," Doran said. "I will need every sword and every grain of salt you can spare. More than that, I will need the marchers to taste a thing they have not tasted in 30 years. "Fear," Anders supplied. "No," Doran said, and Ario saw Anders blink at the unexpected blade. "Memory. It is time they remembered what it costs to step over our borders with torches. We will not roast their children for them to eat, as they sing. We will show them how a realm makes itself difficult to strangle. For that, I need you." Anders tipped his head. The corners of his mouth folded. Not a smile, but the thought of one. "I taught your son to make a camp in winter and to strike a flint in rain," he said. "I taught him the names of the stars that watch our passes. I did not teach him to bend a knee that does not need bending." His gaze slid to Arianne and stayed. "Princess." "Lord Ironwood," she answered, letting the warmth of the air rest on her tongue as if tasting wine. "It is time to have done with old tales. Will you follow my father? If his foot is firm." Anders's eyes flicked to the litter. "If his hand does not shake when it signs what must be signed." Doran did not bridle. He looked at his foot as if it were a separate being with its own slow mind. "My foot is a mule," he said. "It is stubborn, but it still knows how to walk. As for my hand, it has improved with practice." He lifted it. "I have letters for you, and a promise." "And that is?" Anders asked. "That if we do this, we do it all the way to the last hill." Anders Ironwood began to laugh then. Not a large laugh, but a deep one, forged in the belly. "Very well, my prince," he said. "Very well. I have not woken with this many ghosts in years." He held out his hand. Doran took it. "To the bone way, then," Anders said, and the word tasted like a blade unsheathed in a narrow place. Ravens went up before dawn. Black sparks tossed into the paling sky. By the next night, drums were speaking from Salt Shore to Starfall. A slow summoning at first, each house listening to the beat and quickening it to its own measure. The orphans of the Greenblood drifted their flats downriver with the current thick as thread under the keels, singing in their nasal voices of Nymeria's banners moving like a storm of sails. At Ghost Hill, the gulls wheeled in crazy, laughing circles while Lady Tolan's men hammered the war galley's ribs with mallets that left their palms stinging. In the passes, young men woke to find their names chosen for the road and kissed their sisters with the awkward fierceness of boys pretending at manhood. Obara rode at the head of the first column to Will, dust caking the sweat in her hair. Her spear balanced across her saddle as if it were a limb. The Bone Way began as the river valley narrowed. It shouldered down into rock as if the land itself had decided to turn into a chain. The sky was a slit of blue. The path wandered up the spine of the world like a tracksman's dream. Will's banners fluttered, teeth on red, at the notch of the gate. Lord Will himself had a mouth like a scar. "You can bleed here if you like," he said by way of welcome. Obara spat behind her and grinned. "I came to bleed and to make them bleed," she answered. "Tell me where to place my spear." He showed her the ledges where archers could lay an ambuscade, the weathering of the old stone that had been poured to make a wall in the time of great-grandfathers, the hidden wells covered by slabs of rock that men not born to the pass would never suspect. "They will come with shields and men on foot," Will said. "They will bring men with hooks to pull down our little walls and ladders to swarm low places. They will have crossbows, and if their lords have brains, they will bring goats to make a show of not minding the cliffs." Obara's smile turned carnivorous. "Let them bring goats. I like practice meat." He regarded her. "Hunt well, and listen when I tell you to fall back. It takes more courage to lose ground than to gain it when one fights here." In Sunspear, the Tower of the Sun was dressed as for a wedding. Garlands hung in the courtyards. The Shadow City thrummed like a drum. The day of the naming dawned with a heat that made the air dance above the rooftops. Arianne wore a gown the color of ripe apricots and a chain of red gold around her neck, the links shaped like tiny suns. She stood upon the dais before the high seat of the Martells, and she felt the weight of 1,000 eyes rest upon her like sand poured into a bowl. She had been a girl with a wild thought. She was a woman now with a kingdom's intent. Ion and something like a blade balanced inside her. Myrcella came out between two of the palace women, both chosen for gentleness and steadiness, not for their ability to wield steel. The child wore a white dress that made her hair gleam like old gold. There had always been something grave about the girl, as if she had been born with a little room inside her where the wind did not blow. Arianne had seen it first when Myrcella listened to the river women's songs without laughing or rolling her eyes. Now the girl climbed the steps bravely. She glanced once behind her. Ser Ares Oakhart was not there to grant her a soldier's comfort and a sad man's smiles. He was in the earth, That loss lay across the dais like a memory of the first rehearsal for grief. Arianne took the girl's hand. "By the law of Dorne and the will of its people," she said, her voice carrying into the squares where peddlers had abandoned their trays to crane their necks up at the tower. "Myrcella of House Baratheon, first of her name, daughter of a king and a lady of Casterly Rock, is named Queen of the Undulls and the Rhoynar and the First Men. We hold it ancient that the elder child shall inherit, be it a son or a daughter. We hold it firm that a mother knows the weight of a crown as well as a father, and a daughter as well as a son. We hold it dear that promises matter." She raised Myrcella's hand until the child's arm trembled with the strain. "Behold your queen." A roar climbed, uncoiled, and unfolded until even the gulls wheeled in confusion. It rolled down from the Tower of the Sun, down the shadowed alleys of the city, out the gates to the camps pitched in the dunes, to the lines gathering beyond, to the passes and the sea. At Ghost Hill, men beat time on shields until the sound was a nailed storm. At the Hellholt, the Eulers drank huge draughts of thick red wine and sang. At Starfall, the Danes lit fires along the high promontory and watched the smoke climb like a promise. Not all the voices cried out in joy. There were mutters under that great sound, like pebbles under a wave. "A child," said some. "A lion's get," said others. "A piece on a board." But the day did not care what they whispered. The name had been said in the sight of the sun. Doran watched from his chair, his pain like a dog that had resigned itself to lying at his feet. Areo stood at his shoulder in the hum of heat, hand braced on his axe haft. Illyria leaned on the balcony rail until the stone impressed its pattern into her forearms. "She will be hunted," Illyria said quietly, and when she turned her head her eyes seemed unable to find the present. "She will be guarded," Doran replied. "By me." He looked down to where Arianne's careful hand had steadied the girl at the last step. "By Arianne. Will you bind the girl's life to a boy now?" Illyria asked. "Or will you let her be a child a little longer?" Doran did not answer at once. He watched the breeze traverse the banners hung along the tower. The sun and spear of Martell, the pillars of Ironwood, the night flower of Lady Fowler, the winged serpent of Toland, the seven-pointed star of the faith hung for courtesy's sake. "We will let her be what she is until we cannot," he said. "There is one boy I might choose. Or two. It depends on a river I do not control." Areo glanced at him. The prince saw the question in his eyes and shook his head half a fraction. "Not yet," he said, and Areo was glad he had not spoken. In King's Landing, the news broke like pottery. Marjorie's roses wilted in the sun that climbed the Red Keep's courtyards. Cersei threw her goblet, and it smashed on an iron brazier and flung wine like blood. "They dare," she whispered. "They dare crown my daughter." Pycel's beard wavered as his mouth moved. Mace Tyrell puffed and sputtered. He spoke of insolence and ill birth and the necessity of putting the viper back in his amphora. Kevin Lannister rubbed his eye with a forefinger and said little. The small council chamber smelled of ink and old dust and the sour breath of men who thought themselves important. "They will not have her for long," Cersei said. "Send Ser Balon Swan to Sunspear. He will carry the skull of the man who killed my son Joffrey to them as proof of our goodwill." Here her mouth twisted, as if the word had splintered her lips. "And fetch my daughter home. We are all friends now." She smiled, with all her teeth showing. "We are friends until the day they return her to me, and not one day after. I will send men to hold the passes," Pycelle wheezed. "Send Tarly," Mace Tyrell said, too loudly. "He will make a stew of them." "Send Tarly," Cersei repeated, as if she had thought of it first. "Send Tarly to the Prince's Pass. Lord Rowan to the Boneway. The Marchers will be pleased to fight at last on the ground their great-grandfathers bled on. Give them what they sing about." "They will not come in a line like a tourney," warned Kevin. "They will move like Sting and Shadow. They will strike and fall back. They are snakes." "Then we will be hawks," Cersei snapped, and walked to the window, where the city spread itself like a pet starving for attention. Beyond the river, bells rang in sceptries old as the first dust of the realm. "And if they bite the hawk," We will look in the glass and remind ourselves we are lions. Ser Balon left 2 days later with an escort chosen for appearance and for what it kept hidden. Nymeria heard of his route before she had even finished moving her queen from the Tower of the Sun to the stronger apartments in the Spear Tower. She met him at the Greenblood, where the river widened and the ferry boatmen could ply their poles without brushing the banks. She went down to him from the deck of a barge with the grace of a sloop easing into a mooring. Her hair bound back in the Dornish style, her smile dressed in courtesy. "Ser Balon," she said, "we are honored to have you visit us bearing a gift whose torment is matched only by its hue. Glynis, welcome to Dorne." He bowed, polite and careful. "My lady," he said, and his eyes did not turn to the bag behind him tied with red string. "I bear a token of the crown's good faith." "We appreciate tokens," Nymeria said, and drew him to walk with her. "We keep them in a room where we can polish them and take them out to look at when the day requires a story. But we value company more. You shall have the hospitality of Sunspear. Will you give me the pleasure of attending upon our prince?" Ser Balon's gaze wavered for a fraction in the direction of the river. "I am also charged," he said, "with requesting the return of her grace to the capital." Nymeria's smile widened a hair, which meant she was not showing any teeth. "And you will be gratified to hear that her grace has been named, before gods and men, as her realm requires. She is a queen now, not simply a child. Protocol multiplies when crowns are involved. But we must not let it be a mountain thrown into a stream. We will find a course. Sunspear is very good at courses." Ser Balon did not argue. Ser Balon did not smile. He had a face like an honest dog's and eyes that did not let go once they held something. Nymeria liked that in a man. It made him simple to place on a board. Areo watched them from the shade where the barge's awning could not deny him a view. He noted the men with Ser Balon and how their hands lay upon their sword hilts as if upon the flanks of nervous horses. He noted the man on the third boat with the scar running through his left eyebrow, who rolled his shoulders as if easing the weight of chain under his tunic. He noted the bag tied with red string, dark at the bottom. He could almost see the skull within, stripped to its grinning truth. He thought of Oberyn as he had been, quick and laughing and hot. He had never had a chance to become old. Doran received Ser Balon with civility that would have sweetened vinegar. He listened to the practiced words about friendship and daughters and the strange, empty word that men in the capital used as if it were a god, order, and nodded as if he agreed that the world was exactly as they described it. He did not mention crowns. He did not mention the raising of banners. He did not mention the rooms full of swords in the towers of Sunspear. When Ser Balon presented the bag, Areo took it with hands that did not tremble and placed it where incense smoked. The lion's token watched with blank patience. That evening Nymeria went down to the Shadow City with 3 women dressed as servants and 1 knife sewn in the hem of her sleeve. She spoke to a man who dealt in letters and to a woman who taught boys not to die when they fled with a peach in their pockets, and to a priest who had once been a thief. By morning Ser Balon's escort had 4 fewer men, and no one could say precisely how they had gone. One had found a whore with eyes like a promise and forgotten to wake. Another had fallen from the walls after drinking wine strong enough to make a goat forget his name. The last 2 had learned that any river can reach up for the unwary who lean too far, even if they have never in their lives thought of drowning. Ser Balon grew quieter and quieter. Nymeria grew sweeter and sweeter. Doran nodded to himself when she reported and said, "Not blood, if possible. It is better to embarrass than to gore." In the bone way Obara struck. The first scouts came in 3 by 3, stepping carefully, eyes fixed on the place where the path curved to the left around a shoulder of stone. They did not notice the ledge above them until the arrows fell. The second company came with shields and a stout line of men on the ridge. They took the arrows on their shields and jeered, and that was when the rocks rolled. They had been pried loose from the old wall and wedged with wooden struts and rope. When the ropes were cut, the path blossomed into stones. Men cried out and died with their eyes fixed on a sliver of sky like a pawn glancing up at a thumb. Obara waited until the third company came. They were clever. They had men with hooks and men with ladders for the low place, and they brought the goat's lord Will had predicted, little black horns bobbing as they urged them along to distract men posted above. The goats baaed as if in prayer. The men with hooks shouted as if the sound would force the walls to fall. Oberyn stood on the edge of the path with her spear upright like a standard, and when the latter uprights banged into the low wall below her and the first marcher helm rose into view, she set the iron-shod butt of her spear, took it in 2 hands, and thrust it down. The spear tip punched into the visor slit. When she ripped it free, it made a sound like a nail pulled from a plank. The fight was a dance in a corridor. There was no room to swing. There was room only to thrust and brace, to stab and brace again, to fall back 3 paces and then take 1 forward. Oberyn had never loved anything except the clarity of the moment when she and another human being met without masks. She killed 3 men herself and let the men on her right kill another 4, and when the goats stumbled into the fallen rocks and turned to flee, they made a sound that would have been funny in a tavern and was not funny at all among falling bodies. "Back?" Lord Will called, and Oberyn gritted her teeth and obeyed. She knew he was right. If they held every inch, they would break. She wanted to feed on the feeling of victory. She turned it into air in her lungs and moved backward along the ledge, and the men with her moved also, and the wall they left behind them had been made in their grandparents' time and repaired last winter, and it would hold long enough to matter. In the Prince's Pass, Anders Ironwood and Lady Fowler arranged men with the patience of people who had grown up with mountains. The pass was wider than the Bone Way, and that made it more dangerous. There were thus more ways to be clever and more ways to be thinking oneself clever. Anders put archers where the wind would pluck at their hair and men with shields where the wind would not reach. He sent messages like birds, to Starfall, to the Fowlers' castles perched like hawks on cliff edges, to the Illyrians with their river wisdom. Lady Fowler rode without helm, her hair braided into a rope that lashed her back like a banner. The first clash was a test. Men died in ways that did not teach anything new, and some died in ways that did. That was the only way passes taught their lessons. "Keep your horns," Anders told the men who had never fought in such country. "If you blow them whenever you feel brave, we will all go deaf, and the only advantage we hold will go to the other side by courtesy." In Old Town, where the high tower threw a long finger into the sky and the smell of parchment and fish blurred in the corners of the cobbled streets, Tyene Sand walked in a gray dress with a small wooden star at her throat. She smiled at Septons as if she were thinking only of her soul. She told an old woman that she remembered the prayers her mother had taught her and asked if she might kneel in the side chapel where the light fell most kindly. She sat and watched the light travel over the pew ends and thought about fat lords in green fields giving orders to men who lay down in hot passes for them. She met a novice with a face too earnest for his skull. She complimented him on the way his voice journeyed through the Psalms. She asked him if he believed that a girl as much as a boy could inherit under the eyes of the 7. Omens were being watched everywhere, and here no less than in camps. Tyene poured oil into waters that would look smooth when stirred. When she went to the docks, she was a shade more ordinary. She talked to sailors with hands like hawk's feet until one of them forgot what he was not supposed to remember: that a certain ship had put in from Lys carrying 2 men with hair dyed the color of lemons that had not fooled anyone. And when she found where those men went, and what they carried when they departed again, she tucked away everything she had learned to the pocket of her dress and went to the sept to pray. Sand and stone were not the only fronts. On Cape Wrath, a ship with patched sails nosed into a little cove and let down a boat. Men climbed out and drew the prow onto the shingles with the quiet stubbornness of men who had done this many times. John Cunnington stood and looked up at the pale line of the sky and thought of Rhaegar, whom he had loved as a man might love a star that had burned him. The boy with him, no, the young man, had eyes the precise color of a summer sky that promised heat later. His hair fell with careless grace. He held himself as if he had been born to stand in the middle of a circle and have men measure their lives by how far they were from him. "Griffins roost first," Cunnington said quietly. "And then storms end," the boy said, a fullness in his voice that made Cunnington's skin whiten with the memory of too many kinds of loyalty. "Take the castle that matters, and you take everything the Stormlords think they know about themselves." "And Dorne?" asked the half-mester, stooping under his bundles. "Do we speak to them now?" "Not yet," Cunnington said, but his mind shifted its weight as he said it. The passes were singing, even this far north. The realm would not hear at once. The realm could not move as a whole animal. But Dorne had named a child queen. Dorne had drawn knives out of silk, and the realm would not be able to ignore that. He knew Doran Martell a little from a distance taken on battlefields and in corridors. He had thought him slow. He had been wrong, or at least out of date. A new map was being drawn. He sent a letter anyway with a hand he trusted. The words were cautious. They said, "The house you have waited for is not the one you were told would come." They said, "A dragon in exile is an old song and may return with new words." They said, "Your river flows the same way yours always has, toward patience. But the sea it meets has changed its tide." He sealed it with wax he had made warm between his hands and gave it to a man who could move through trees without being noticed by other branches. At Sunspear, the letter came to Doran while he was being fitted for a boot that would not pain him in the night. He read it and looked at the craftsman, whose fingers were nimble as his own once had been. "It is strange how many men remind me of my brother now he is dead," he said to Areo. "Do you know who wrote that?" Areo asked. Doran folded the letter. "I know who thinks that way," he said, and in his eyes there was both a warning and a measure of hope. "I will answer him. I will answer him as a prince answers a captain. Come to my shore and we will set a table." When the reply was sent, Doran called Arianne. She came with her hair down and her feet bare, as she had when she was little, and the old grief of having been withheld from knowledge rose and ebbed before it could speak. "I have named a queen," Doran said. "Now I would send a princess." "To whom?" she asked, half-guessing. "To a boy with a name that should have died on the trident." Arianne's breath snagged. "You will give me to him?" "I will give you to a conversation," Doran said. "If he is worth a crown, he will prove it with the way he speaks, not the way he holds a sword. If he is worth you, he will know how to look at Dorne and see more than sand." "And Myrcella?" Arianne asked, Doran's mouth crooked. "Myrcella is queen because it was time for the realm to hear that word spoken. She is also a child, and we will not use her as a shut door when we may use her as a window. If this boy is truly what this letter suggests, he will need a road into the south and into the heart of the Riverlands and the Crownlands besides. You are that road. If he is not what the letter suggests, I will still have learned something useful while why. Oh, you are away." Arianne thought of the boy and did not think of Oberyn. "I will go," she said. "And take men who do not talk too much," Doran replied. "And take Ser Demon's sand, who knows how to move without spilling the sand from his boot." He paused. "Do not take Darkstar." Arianne's mouth went dry. The name still tasted of blood and broken planning. "He rides for Blackhaven," she said. "He hates me enough to cross the pass by himself, and if he dies there will be relief in it. Better an enemy where you can see him than a grudge moving where you cannot," Doran said. Areo said, "Give him to me." Doran looked at him and then at the space between them, which had been filled with duty for so long Areo could not remember a time when it had been otherwise. "Go," Doran said, "and do it without noise." It took Areo 2 days and a night to catch Darkstar on the road towards Skirich. The man was like a shard of the night broken off and convinced it could cut anything. Areo found him on a rock where the road widened barely enough for 2 horses to pass. His hair like a river's dark reflection. His sword naked and rested across his knees. "They sent the axeman," Darkstar said, as if amused that the world had remembered to be theatrical for him. "They sent the one who will not miss," Areo answered. He had learned to keep his voice from making promises his body might not keep. "They fought because men like Darkstar know only what steel tells them." Areo's axe moved slowly, patiently, and then quickly, once. Darkstar's blade was fast as a thought that has waited its entire life for a moment. Twice the sword took chips from the axe haft. He did exactly what Anders had said a man with a brain would do. Used arrows, used patience, used men who did not panic when goats screamed. He took ground slowly. Where he could not take it, he made it useless. He pushed into the prince's pass like a man moving into a woman. He did not trust not to bite, but wanted anyway. "Sting," Anders Ironwood told his men. "Do not crush. Leave their dead where they can see them and then vanish before they decide they are angry." At the Boneway, Obara learned what it meant to hate a landscape and love its company. She took to walking the ledges at night, listening to men snore like broken bellows and to the wind soughing its way from crack to crack. She thought of her father and how he had kissed life and death with the same mouth. She grew leaner. She slept on rock. When she dreamed of sand turning to glass and fire. Then she woke and washed her face in cold water and set her spear butt down and did not think of glass again. "Are you not tired?" Lord Will asked her once, as if they had been one person for a moment. "Never," she lied. In King's Landing, Cersei received a letter that said the queen they had named in Sunspear had been crowned by law older than the trident and older than the roses she liked to tuck between her bodice and her skin. She went to the sept and knelt and thought not of gods but of the names of men she would have cut into small pieces when the chance came. The High Septon touched holy oil to her brow and thought of the price of ships. At Highgarden, Mace Tyrell walked through a garden with his daughter and talked of collation and treaties and what songs would be sung if the Reach drove the snakes back to their holes. Marjorie told him stories about pigeons until he laughed and forgot the question he had been about to ask. At Storm's End, when the wind had poured itself into the stone and become part of it generations ago, John Connington stood in a cave and watched men move like mice through the reed beds. "It can be taken," the boy said, and Connington wanted to say that everything can be taken if the world is tired of watching it be itself. Instead, he sent ravens to men who had been boys when he had been a man. Arryn crossed the deep country of the Stormlands with a handful of men who knew how to keep their cloaks from snagging on thorns. She did not ride like a lady because there were no eyes to see and judge her in the wild except the eyes of birds. She thought of the boy she was riding to meet and of the child she had held up as a queen. She thought of her father's hand on hers, the heat of it. She thought of the heat of another hand once, a man who had been brave and cruel only in one way. In the bones of the hills the rain stored itself for a sudden hour every afternoon, and in that hour she learned to accept wet feet as part of her luck. They met at Griffin's Roost, the boy and the princess. The walls had taken his colors easily. That in itself was a warning. He stood in the hall with a sword at his hip and a softness at the corners of his mouth that told Arryn he had never yet begged for anything. She bowed to him because she had been born knowing how to pay men in gestures, and because it would flatter him without cost to her. He bowed to her because he had been taught to court allies, and because the way she held herself told him that losing her would make something in the air less interesting. "You are Arryn of Dorne," he said, and the vowels of her name looked different on his tongue. "And you are whatever you say you are," she answered, amused and serious at once. "Will you be a little more precise?" "I am Aegon," he said, and did not say of House Targaryen, as a boy might who had not yet earned the right to assume his audience's patience. "And I need what you can give." "What is that?" she asked. "And mind that you are asking Dorne. We give differently than the rest of the realm." "I need a pass," he said. "Not through stone, through hearts. I need the Stormlords to remember that a dragon once burned for them. I need the Reach to decide the lion can defend itself. I need the Riverlands to believe the years can be unmade and made again. I need your father's name behind mine. I need your hand, but not for a week. No," he checked himself, color rising. "Not for a wedding today, for a sign. Your house beside my house. Your son beside my dragon on the lists and on the parchment." "You want everything?" Arryn said, but her voice had softened. Men who asked for horses and carts and bread were dull. Men who asked for everything could be dangerous, but they were never dull. If you were to marry in the south, the Reach would think we had moved to take their place. If you were to marry in the north, Dorne would think you had chosen roads that do not know sand at all. If you were to marry a child, the realm would laugh and then silence itself when the child died and the alliance died with it. If you marry me, you take Dorne and a quarrel with a queen's mother. If you marry no one, you will set every lord to calculating like men who think themselves mathematicians because they can count their own fingers. She smiled, letting him see a glint of what lay behind her eyes. "Tell me what my father wants to hear." "That I understand the past," he said. "That I know what was promised to you once when you were a girl and what that promise cost you when it did not come. that I will not treat Dorne as a spice you shake on food to make it taste exotic, that I will let Dorne be Dorne and not try to make it a field with hedges, that I will let your law stand in your land, that I will not require you to kneel if what I really want is for you to stand at my side. She watched him while he spoke and thought the boy is pretty, but that is not enough, and the boy is clever enough, but that is not enough either. And then she thought of her father's letter that had spoken of patience like a shore on which waves wear themselves out. You will write to my father and say these words, she said. I will carry the letter for you, and I will tell him how you said them. I will write, he replied, and the way he said it told her he had learned that words are not just sounds that one puts into air. A week later, in a valley filled with orange trees where the scent of blossoms under more sun than the Stormlands had ever expected to know made men giddy, Arianne stood between the boy called Aegon and Ser Demon's Sand for a ceremony that was not a wedding and meant more. They exchanged tokens. They ate bread and salt. The men who watched would ride away and tell others, and the telling would be the point of the thing. On a hill above them, a rider watched with a glass. He turned and galloped for the coast. He carried with him more than news. He carried the taste of a moment when the realm had decided to be another shape. By then, Oberyn was facing a new thing in the Bone Way. Fire pots rolled on carts wrapped in wet hides. When the marchers sent them barreling into the low place and the hides had dried, they burst and flame licked at rock as if hungry. Smoke stropped itself on the stone and got into men's chests and thoughts. Will's boys pissed on blankets and lay them across the rocks and smothered what they could and choked and moved their feet where they had never thought feet would be needed. Oberyn's hands were raw up to the wrists. She swung her spear, and then she thought of putting it down and picking up a bucket. She picked up the bucket. She ran with it. She shouted until her throat bled. For a while they were all simply bodies in heat. And then the wind shifted and threw the smoke back into the marchers' faces, and they laughed like men hauled from a river. At the Princess Pass, Tarly learned that what he did with excellence did not always produce excellence. He had broken 2 of Anders's smaller lines, and the third had bent like a bow that wants to sing. He moved to press. A flight of arrows came, unremarkable, and then stones tumbled but in a pattern too deliberate to be accident. Men screamed and died in their helmets, and Tarly spoke to his officers chilled and calm as if at a dinner where a host has been found dead but the guests are hungry still. He had never minded other men's deaths. He had only minded incompetence. He did not intend to be incompetent here. He brought up sappers. Lady Fowler came down at dawn with men from Skirich who went over the ridge like goats. There is a point when cleverness toward the enemy must be balanced with cleverness toward the land. The land decided to favor its own. Nymeria came to Doran with a worry. The man you like, Swan, has teeth, she said. He needs to be kept in Sunspear until we know what Arianne returns us. But I will tell you this, the longer we keep him, the more we will have to feed him. He is too honest to rot comfortably. She paused. I have kept him alive and bored. Keep him alive and bored a little longer, Doran said. Arianne will come with Pape. That will gladden you, and then I will decide whether to send him home with it and watch the realm wait to see which song he sings to his queen. Ellaria came with a different worry. Children are dying, she said simply, and Doran's hands closed on the arm of his chair until the knuckles paled. Our boys, marcher boys, boys who have never been given a fig for themselves and boys who have never wanted for food. The water is running with more salt than it should. I know, Doran said. Do you? She asked. I loved your brother. I knew what he loved in this world and what he laughed at and what he could break with what he carried at the end of his arm. But I loved him as a man. I did not love him as a banner. Banners make smoke that chokes. He closed his eyes. If I could unmake it and still have justice, he whispered and stopped, because he knew the second clause named the first a lie. I cannot, but I can make certain kinds of death less likely. The longer we hold the passes without rushing, the smaller the flood beyond will be. And there is this, we do not burn fields when we cross a border, and we do not put heads on spikes unless we have to. If I do nothing, our grief is a closed room that smells of itself. If I do this, we at least open a window. The air that comes in is not always good, but it is not always foul. Ellaria turned her face away. The sea talked to the palace, a conversation of endless syllables. "Who will hold the window while you sleep?" she asked. "I have an axeman and a daughter," Doran said. Soon enough, word came from the Stormlands that a boy with a name that should have cracked in his mouth like an egg had said it without stumbling and had taken a castle men had thought would resist him. He had done it with creativity and with help, and Cunnington had proved that a soldier who once ran does not forget how to measure a wall. The Storm Lords were whispering. The world had begun to turn in a new way. Arian's letter was long and full of air that smelled like oranges. Doran read it and felt something he had not let himself feel in years. Approval untainted by caution. He sent for Ser Balonswan and gave him wine and food and said, "You will take a message to your queen's mother from me, and one to the boy who has called himself Aegon. You will tell the Lannister that Dorne has named a queen by law and by right, and that we will sit in our sands and think in our shade as long as we like. You will tell the boy that if he comes to Storm's End with fire in his hands, we will open a door for him that has been closed since the last dragon's funeral." Ser Balon swallowed. He did not say what he thought. He was not a man who believed silence useful. He believed truth was duty. But here truth would be like throwing a cup of water into the green blood and expecting the river to run backward for the effort. "I will carry your words," he said, and bowed as if his neck had a hinge. Nymeria walked beside him to the docks. "You will not come back this way," she said lightly. "Whether you live or die, that is not a prophecy. Only the way the world decides such things. I may yet hope to return as an ambassador between friends," said Ser Balon, and Nymeria turned her head and looked at him because honesty has a taste in air. "If that comes," she said, "I will set a chair for you." She watched the ship until it made its fluked way where the water caught light and then lost it. When the letter reached the Red Keep, Cersei flung it into the brazier and then had it pulled out again because there was a name she needed to show to men whose eyes would widen. She did not say Aegon. She said pretender and boy and insult. She did not say that part of her longed for a world where a prince with silver hair would come down out of the clouds to tell her she had been right all her life about what blood should mean. She said only that the Dornish were snakes and would be crushed, and that she would walk on their skins to the Sept where she would be crowned with a crown that had never touched her brows. In the passes, summer stretched itself until it was thin and trembling. Men began to talk of winter as if it were a story a grandmother tells. Not because she believes it, but because children like to be frightened in safety. Tarly had not made the ground he wanted. Anders had not yet sent him scurrying. The Boneway remained a sore that did not close and did not infect. Then Storm's End fell. It fell with a whisper and a shout. The whisper of a gate whose hinges had not been oiled in a generation, and the shout of men who could not believe the thing they were climbing had a top. Cunnington stood in the gatehouse with his hand on a doorpost as if it had been a man's shoulder. The boy walked the ramparts the next morning while gulls beat the air with surprised wings. He looked toward Dorne and thought of the letter that had said, "Come if you can bring yourself to carry your own name like steel." "Now," he told Cunnington, and set his face toward the bone-white spines of the mountains. Arian was in the camp where orange and lemon trees had given way to scrub and flint when the dragon flags came over the rise. She felt something shake in the camp. Fear, joy, hunger. She rode out to meet them, Ser Demon beside her, and the sun hit the boy's hair and made it gleam, and she thought, there are worse things to have at one's shoulder when one goes to parley with the Reach. In Sunspear, Areo woke in the night and walked the halls because sleep had not been kind. He turned a corner and found Myrcella sitting on a bench carved with fishes, her feet not touching the floor. She had a shawl around her shoulders and a book open on her knees. She had been taught to read both for pleasure and for solace. "Princess," Areo said, and then corrected himself as he always did now. "Your Grace." She looked up, and her face was solemn as a moon that has seen something it will not tell. "Ser Areo," she said, "because a child who becomes a queen must learn to honor men who have known her since she wiped blood from a scraped knee on her sleeve. Will you sit?" He sat because refusing would have broken something that did not need breaking. She closed her book, marking her place with a ribbon the color of pomegranate seeds. "They say," she said, "that when my mother hears that I have a crown she will be angry enough to throw a chair. Areo thought of a goblet smashing on iron. Men and women who are used to breaking what resists them do not need chairs, he said. She nodded. I liked it here before anyone called me a queen, she said, and a small smile traveled across her face like light on a wall. Do you think I will be safe? I think, Areo told her, careful and true, that there is no word for safe that means what you want it to mean now. I think that as long as you are a child, you will have men who will climb mountains and walk into rooms meant to kill them so that you may read your book for another hour. I think that when you are older, you will decide whether to be brave in a way that makes other people brave, or brave in a way that makes other people afraid. She bit her lip and looked down at the book as if the letters would rearrange themselves into an answer. I do not want anyone to die because of me, she said, but I like being what I am. That is the curse of kings and sometimes their advantage, Areo replied. It is the curse of men who protect them also. She nodded again, as if a little iron had moved into her bones. I will sleep now, she said, and gathered her shawl in both hands. And when she stood, she did not totter as children sometimes do when they wake from sitting long. She walked away with the steadiness that had always been her best gift. When Aegon came to the prince's pass with his banners, the world held its breath as if it feared to startle anyone. Anders Ironwood rode out under a flag that meant talk. So did Tarly. The two lines of men facing one another on their horses made the valley look like a mouth full of teeth. Arianne sat her mare beside the boy. Doran watched from Sunspear the way a man watches smoke to see which way the wind intends to blow. Tarly spoke first because he hated forms and thought that if he spoke, forms could not touch him. You bring a pretender into a pass that belongs to men loyal to their king, he said. I bring an heir into lands that forgot they were part of a realm, Aegon answered, and Arianne thought, that is too bold, and yet it is exactly right, because what else will anyone remember later? If you will step aside, I will remove the cause of this quarrel from the capital, and you may return to your hedges and your hawks without having to explain to your sons why you died on a rock. Tarly's mouth tightened, which for him was a laugh. I explain nothing to sons, he said, not as boast but as simple admission. But I do not step aside for boys with stories. Anders lifted his hand and the wind stroked his sleeve. Let us say we will not slaughter one another today, he said. Let us say we will put sharp things away and try words the way men in other parts of the world do when they discover their women value them living. The boy has taken Storm's End. He has the river to the north and the sea to the south and Dorne at his shoulder. The Reach cannot fight a war in 3 places at once and keep its civilians in bread. The capital has. He glanced to Arianne, and that glance was the courtesy one pays a chess player who has placed a knight well, problems of its own. I do not, Tarly said, play at riddles. Then here is the plain speech, Anders replied. The Prince of Dorne is making a shape. That shape allows you to keep your skin and your honor both if you will admit that you do not have the wherewithal at the moment to make the shape you prefer. It allows you to retreat without calling it retreat. Tarly's eyes moved to Aegon. And you? I call water water and stone stone, Aegon said. If you stay and force killing, I will kill. If you go and save it for another day, I will count that as a victory also. That day, for reasons that had very little to do with chivalry or pride or mercy, and everything to do with food and ships and the quiet terror that had started to eat at the corners of the capital, Tarly chose to lift his banners and turn his horse. He did it with precision, without hurry, with the same modest economy with which he ate and killed. He took his men back down the pass and said nothing. The roar that went up from the Dorne side sounded like wind turned into noise. Arianne let out a breath she had not known she had stolen. She felt the bones in her spine align with a new contour. She looked at the boy and saw uncertainty flicker and go away. She wanted to put her hand on his and did not. She wanted to ride to her father and tell him she had brought him a moment that was not a map but would do until a map could be made. When word reached King's Landing that the boy had walked through the Prince's Pass with Dorne smiling like a serpent in a sunbeam beside him, the Queen Regent raged. She did something then that would have been madness in another woman and was only character in her. She summoned the High Septon and gave him a gift she believed would make him love her. She called it the rearmament of the faith, and she thought she had purchased an army that would pray when she told it to and cut throats when she lifted a finger. He bowed and took the gift and knew it was a blade. The city began to fill with men who wore stars and men who wore axes carved with 7 little stripes. The smell of incense grew foul. The smell of fear grew sharp. Marjorie walked through the gardens with 3 little cousins and told them a story about a rose that had thorned itself on purpose and could not understand why its petals were red. In Sunspear, Doran listened to the reports and smiled without moving his mouth. He spoke to Myrcella with gentleness and did not tell her that she was a ship being built while she floated. He sent for Ellaria and told her that her daughters, the ones he had not yet named to their work, would be kept close beside her where they could learn that vengeance can be an alphabet and should not be an alphabet that spells only one word. He let Areo rest in the afternoons in a room where the sea sang through a low window, and he told him without words that he had no intention of letting him rest long. The last push came not in the passes nor at Storm's End but in the honeycomb of streets that made up the Shadow City. A man came with poison in a ring. A woman came with a knife in her shoe. An old man came with a prayer in his mouth that would have been a spell if spells had not been wise enough to leave the world when dragons went. Tyene found the knife and took it. Nymeria found the ring and laid it in the sun to watch the drop in it glitter harmless until it dried. Areo found the prayer and turned it into breath by taking the man's hands in his huge one and holding them still until the old man remembered he was a grandfather. The day passed without a queen dying. That was victory now, not song, not banners, not a general speech. A child reading her book uncut. A woman able to put her head down without hearing horns. When Arion came home, the sun struck the spear tower at an angle that made it look almost like a blade poised above the sea. Her father held her hands and did not speak for a long time. When he did, he said only, "You did well. I wanted to hear that," she told him, and laughed because tears were close and laughter was more useful. "What comes next?" Ellaria asked because someone had to ask it. Doran looked toward the horizon, which in Dorne is always a lesson in how far a line can be dragged before it breaks. "Next," he said. "We write letters that say that the queen we have named recognizes the boy as the instrument by which the law may be restored where it has decayed. We write to the Reach and say that we hold no hatred for them. We simply have no patience for men who think their hills grow higher if they beat ours down. We write to the Riverlands and the Vale and say, we are what we have always been, and we remember our promises, and we will not be told by gardeners when to plant and when to reap. And we write to a woman across the sea with dragons and say, if you mean to come, come. If you mean to burn, burn. But do not think we will stand by and let you be what our worst enemies have been. Choose. And if she does not choose?" asked Nymeria, who liked choices because she liked the way the world wriggled when it had them. "Then," Doran said softly, "we will allow the sea to do what it always does. Drown people who do not respect it." Oberyn came back to Sunspear then, walking as a woman who had forgotten how to do anything slowly. She put her spear against the pillar where she had put it on the day of the letter and leaned her forehead against the shaft. Areo watched her close her eyes and knew that she had been built for this and that no one is built to do it forever. He thought of all the men he had put in the ground and of the one thing that had always made it bearable, that he had watched over people who deserved the watching. The war did not end that day. Wars do not end when banners are taken down or put up. They end when the last widow knows she will not have to lay out another sheet and set another candle and write another name in the corner of her memory. But the shape of it had changed. A boy from the Riverlands with the wrong hair and the right name walked where dragons had walked. A girl from the Red Hills held up a child and said "Queen," and kept saying "Queen," until the word stopped sounding strange. The Bone Way did not become a road in a garden. It remained a place where men went to die. The Prince's Pass continued to count bones under its stones. But the men who walked those paths did so with a new map in their heads. Late one evening, Areo stood at the same place he had stood the day the letter came. The fountains still threw light like broken glass. Children shrieked and splashed. Ellaria watched them with her arms folded as if holding herself together. Doran sat with his foot wrapped and his hands steepled and his eyes turned toward a part of the sky that had been empty of dragons for so long no one remembered what to call the shape they made. Myrcella walked under a tree whose branches were heavy with perfumes and lifted her hands to catch falling blossoms. She looked like a child and like something more than a child, and Areo wished with the fierce, impossible wish of a man who had given his strength to a house, that the world would remember how to make room for both at once. One day the girl would choose how to rule. One day, the boy would choose whether to be a king of the old kind or to be something the realm had not yet had words for. One day, ships would come across the narrow sea with sails that gleamed like scales. One day, the passes would fall silent again, and men would forget and remember and forget. For now the water glittered, the sun rested on stone and warmed it. Men sharpened knives and shaped treaties. The drums of Dorne beat slower, like a heart that has run and is learning again how to breathe. The Prince of Dorne closed his eyes and listened to all of it, and Areo, his axe against his breast, thought, "This is what it means to hold a border when the wind changes." He did not know if history would call it victory. He knew only that the children laughed, and that his prince had moved from waiting to walking, and that when a realm learns to stand in its own law, it grows taller all at once, and no one can measure the inches until much later, when men make songs and think songs have explained anything. He closed his eyes to the sound of water, and when he opened them again the horizon was still the promising nothing and everything in equal parts, as horizons do to those stubborn enough to keep looking.